Hey everybody, AJ and Nick here. We just wanted to take a moment before we start the episode to talk to you about something very important to us.
AJ and I are releasing this episode on June 19th, which is commonly called Juneteenth. And it feels very, very important to us that we both recognize and talk about both Black Lives Matter and the podcast as it is in general. AJ and I are in agreement in that Black Lives Matter unequivocally. Absolutely. It is a very important movement, and there have been some interesting talks between AJ and I about the very nature of the canon, the Creating Canon podcast, partially because a lot of the movies that we're watching were made in a time where racism was a little more played for jokes. Yep. Racism was, characters were openly racist and they could still be heroes.
We're not blind to the fact that these were very problematic movies, even at the time they were made.
Yes, they were problematic at the time when they were made, and they're even more problematic now, considering most of them were made in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. And AJ and I are not blind to that fact.
No.
And that has been something that, even though we have a deep love for these movies, there is also a deep fear of what we are putting out into the world.
And it's mainly because we are, we're just trying to analyze these movies. We do enjoy them. We enjoy watching them with each other, but we are not attempting to glorify them, I don't think. Especially the problematic parts of them.
Yeah, and I think AJ and I have always tried to call out the problematic parts, and that is something that we will continue to do. But considering the movies we are discussing, we just want to make it unequivocal that Black Lives Matter and that we support the Black Lives Matter movement incredibly.
Yes, and please consider making donations, if you can, to the following: the ACLU and the ACLU of Minnesota, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Reclaim the Block, the Okra Project, the Black Visions Collective, The Color of Change, and of course, blacklivesmatter.com. Also, get out there and vote this November. Now on with the show. Hello and welcome to Creating Canon with your hosts, AJ Hamilton and Another Canon Pax.
Yeah, baby!
Another is short for another, and in fact, that's not even his name. His name... See, I'm correcting myself.
This is weird.
And Nicholas C. Pappas.
Yay!
What's up, dude? You know we can just, put in fake sounds. We can just put in clapping.
I'd rather the real sounds.
You want that?
Of one man clapping for himself.
What is the sound of one man clapping? That, guys.
That right there.
That.
Oh, hey,
oh my goodness.
AJ, we just had our 1-year anniversary episode.
Cananemy Awards.
The Cananemy Awards.
Hope you all enjoyed that episode.
My lord. That's actually one of my favorites, I think.
It was really fun to do.
That was a fun episode.
It was a great review. It was fun to look back at the whole year and all of the fun, insane movies that we've watched.
Yeah, it was. So the Cananemy Awards, I thought, was a great season ender for us. Mm-hmm. It was exciting.
Yeah.
And now we're back with our very first episode of season 2.
Hey!
Holy shit!
Season 2, guys.
52 episodes in the books.
Yeah, plus all the cannon blasts.
7 or 8 cannon blasts.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Man, you guys have been with us through thick and thin.
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
man.
yes. Even our 2 Iceland listeners.
Yes, thank you.
We appreciate you very much.
Heck yeah, and everybody else around the world.
Well, of course. I mean, AJ and I were just looking at it, and I mean, it's not like we have a billion listeners, but it's cool to have Iceland and Spain,
the Philippines, New Zealand.
We had a couple New Zealand, Australia. Yeah. We've got United Kingdom, Germany, Denmark.
Yep. All
Sweden,
over the place.
It's we had a couple of Brazil and Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
It's really cool to
Skokie, Illinois.
Yep. There's a barbershop quartet that listens to us.
I've heard that.
Yeah, Usual Suspects reference.
I have that board up there. Actually, I have the Skokie, Illinois.
Skokie, Illinois board.
Heck yeah. I soze'd myself.
I just dropped a coffee cup in shock. No. Kobayashi.
No.
Kobayashi. So this episode, we have decided to return to our roots.
And this episode is a promise.
Yes.
As well, because
I guess so.
We promise you every year that this is going to be the beginning of the next season.
Yeah. So the pilot episode, when we talked about why we're doing this podcast, we watched a non-canon film, but a very canon film.
Yes, indeed.
It is a documentary on canon films
by Mark Hartley.
Called Electric Boogaloo: The Wild Untold Story of Canon Films. Came out in 2014.
That's right.
It was a great starting place to be able to talk about what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. And we thought it would be nice to just sort of revisit that and sort of go back to our roots.
And we kind of see it in more and more context.
Yes.
The fun thing to do is to go through and point out the things that we have seen, how people are talking about that, and then also see the things that we're very much looking forward to.
Yeah.
That was really fun.
Also, too, it's fun to rewatch it and then realize that the list that I thought I had completed of all the canon movies that were made is actually incomplete.
Woefully incomplete.
A little incomplete. So now it's time to go back and reinvest some time to see where or how I missed these.
Thanks for doing that research, buddy.
No worries. It's fun. I actually really enjoy it. And it gave us some ideas very specifically, and we're not going to get into any details.
No, that's a secret.
But I think we do now officially know what our canon film is going to be.
And I'm so excited for it.
It's
brilliant and so simple.
It's one of those things where, like, it was laying there in front of us the whole time. I cannot believe we didn't take it.
I know.
It's just going to be boobs and explosions. It's going to be exploding boobs.
So simple.
Yeah. One of the things that I found fun and interesting in watching the documentary again, after watching 52 or so canon movies in a year, and to be clear, I should say that I had seen a bunch of canon films, obviously, beforehand.
Sure.
But there were a ton of things that were new to me.
Same.
And I don't think I ever really thought of it in the process of, like, this is a canon film. I'm going to watch it through this specific lens. I was watching these movies as a lens of, like, it's just a movie that I wanted to see.
The canon logo would pop up, and you'd be like, huh,
yeah,
okay,
and
cool.
I would give it as much, well, eventually I started to learn how to give it a little more consideration, but I think, you know, in some ways you sort of give it the same consideration as a Universal logo.
Oh,
you
sure.
don't really think about it like, oh, it's a I'm burp.
I know, I do that all the time, and I feel bad about it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been an interesting journey to watch the 52 canon movies.
Yeah.
And
through that specific lens.
Actually, it's 50 because our first episode of season 1 was this, and our last episode of season 1 was the awards show.
And there have been a couple of canon fodder episodes.
So, but approximately 50 movies, including the 21st century. You know what? We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Let's forget about the numbers, folks.
Listen, we're going to be very golden
Who's prosecuting
about
who
this.
right now?
You know, we're just going to go ahead and we are going to make up our own rules as we go along. And it doesn't matter what anyone else
This is creating canon, goddammit.
Yeah, we're going to do whatever we feel like.
That's right.
But the point that I was going to get at was... I found it interesting that a lot of the things that we have been identifying as quote-unquote canon throughout our journey are actually things that the people who were in the documentary who worked with Golan and Globus would also identify as canon and what their aesthetic is.
Right.
So that was interesting.
You know what I found very interesting was that in the beginning of the documentary, they're referred to as conservative.
Yes.
Conservative for Israel, when Yoram and Menachem were over there. And yet they perceived what America would want. And they sort of switched a little bit when they came over here. When they bought Canon, they sort of were like, you know what? They're going to want boobs and guns.
Oh, there's nothing more conservative than boobs and guns.
That's fair. That's very fair.
I mean, I hate to say it, but have you ever been to a NASCAR rally?
Oh...
It's
Yeah.
just boobs and guns and cars.
That is fair.
Yeah.
That is very fair.
So,
Okay.
In that sense, there were a couple of interesting things that I forgot.
What's
in
that?
Golan and Globus were the ones who sort of birthed Israeli cinema.
Right.
That's what they had mentioned in the doc.
And as of 2014 or whenever this was filmed, they were saying that Lemon Popsicle is still the highest grossing
Film of all time in Israeli box office history.
crazy.
And then at one point, was it 3 and 4 movies were made by the Golan, the team of Golan and Globus, but
Yeah.
mostly Golan at that point in time?
That's insane.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's an accomplishment in itself.
Yeah.
But it's odd that they were not satisfied with that.
Yeah.
I suppose it's because Hollywood is the center of all film.
Right.
I mean, in a lot of people's, even foreign people's, perception.
Well, and they kind of mentioned it very specifically in the documentary that Golan and Globus would see Hollywood movies as children, and that's the thing that they became most interested in. And their love of filmmaking was kind of unstoppable.
Especially Menachem's. Like,
yes.
Yoram was there to produce and to sort of be the money guy.
Yeah.
But Menachem has it in his blood.
Yes, that's what it seemed like.
In fact, I think that was a quote
Yeah,
from somebody
right.
or other. Because, yeah, he was so passionate about it, regardless of the sacrifices that he had to make,
Yeah.
or the stupidity that kind of followed his decision-making.
Well, yeah.
I mean, not stupidity, but foolhardiness.
Well, it almost felt like they were just throwing as much shit against the wall and seeing what stuck.
Yeah, that actually felt like just the canon way.
Yeah. And all the money ending up on the screen seemed to be the canon way for the most part, where every cent was somehow figured out how we can not spend it on whining and dining, but how we can just put it out there. So there's something admirable about that. I don't know.
There is. Menachem actually says near the end of the documentary that he wouldn't know what to do, how to make a movie with $30 million.
Which, ironically, though,
Yeah.
is juxtaposed against, that's early in his career saying that,
Yeah.
where the kind of final nails in the canon coffin were Over the Top, which was an over $25 million budget.
Right.
Superman 4, which was 17.
17, yeah.
And then
Masters of the Universe, which was 22,
22.
I think, yeah.
And all of those were supposed to have bigger budgets.
Right.
It's just that once they started filming, they were like, fuck you, you can't have that much money, we don't have it. Sorry, bye. And could you imagine, like, it's one thing if you are about to go into production and are like, you have less than we thought. It's another thing when you start shooting
in the
movie.
middle of it. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you have a $30 million budget like Superman was supposed to have, you're halfway through filming, you've, in theory, spent $15 million because you're halfway through.
Yeah.
And then they call you up and they go, your budget's actually only 17. You've already spent 15. You only have $2 million left to make the rest of your movie.
And also, you think about it, I mean, a lot of that money would have gone to post-production, and that's why
some of those
they
things
reuse stuff. That's why the special effects don't look stellar.
Yeah.
You know?
Menachem Golan had mentioned that making a motion picture is like being in a war.
Oh, God.
Which I thought was fascinating, especially because right after that they were described as ruthless, they had no scruples, they were carpetbaggers, they were con men, they were all of these things, which I thought was really fascinating.
There's a very mixed perception of
Yeah.
them because some people look at them with less contempt than others, clearly, throughout this.
Zeffirelli called them. Zeffirelli said they were the best producers they've ever had in their entire lives, and Robert Forrester had said that Menachem Golan was the best director he ever worked
working with them on
Delta Force.
Delta Force, yeah.
Which is crazy.
And
on so many levels.
And then there's such vitriol from other people in the interviews. Now,
was it Bo Derek?
Bo Derek didn't like that because they had stolen from her.
Well, that's true.
That was weird.
But there was another woman who literally lit the movie she was in on fire.
What was it? America 3000?
Yes.
Yeah. Whoever was the star,
and she lit it on fire while talking about the movie.
Well, she had a bad experience where they weren't paying the crew, and she decided to walk off the set.
Well, and I'm not trying to defend them in either way. But
absolutely, I'm just explaining.
That dichotomy is
the
nuts.
The diametrically opposed experiences that people had with these guys. I mean, of course, there are different personalities that work better or worse in any business, but this is a high stress situation making a movie, and especially on the shoestrings that they were giving them.
Yes.
I thought what was fascinating was when they had a flagship movie in a season or a year or something, and then they gave the other money to little indie movies like Barfly or different like tiny successes that they had that were just like, wow, this is fascinating. And yet with the Canon logo on the front, didn't really it cheapened the
thing. Well, Runaway Train was a movie that a lot of people had mentioned very specifically about. And we'll get there on the podcast one of these days.
Excited for that.
Where they talked about, if you see that, it's legitimately one of the best movie experiences you'll ever have.
Right.
But with the Canon logo, at the time, people just sort of wrote it off.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we talked about this before, but this idea of packaging movies, where you say to somebody, like, you won't get our A picture unless you show our B and C picture as well.
Exactly.
That is still sort of around, and it was kind of always around. And what struck me was the first time we watched this documentary was to think about how Golden Globus really revolutionized Hollywood, and a lot of the practices that they used that were kind of unscrupulous then are the same exact practices people use now.
They're duplicating them just in a more disciplined way. I think that they came over here and it was, you know, the Wild West.
Yes. Well, yeah. Well, but I mean, just even thinking that they would get foreign money to make a movie based off the poster, and then they would make the movie, which is what people do today with smaller budget films.
Sure.
But the other thing that I was going to say, though, which I didn't quite realize last time that struck me this time, was how old school they also were. I mean, when we go back to that idea of they owned movie theaters, which was Golden Era Hollywood, right, where they would show exclusively their films. They would package movies together, which was like when you did a double feature, that's where A and B features came from. Like, it's a B movie, it's an A movie. They would do that. And then the fact that they created a stable of stars, which is such a Golden Era idea.
Golden Era, and it's very interesting to me, trying this acting thing down in L.A. The stable of actors seems like somewhat of a better model in a way, because it just there's no stability. There's absolutely no stability for anybody unless you are an A-list actor or a consistently working character actor or something like that. But wouldn't it be nice to have a format like I
don't know if Judy Garland would agree with you.
That's fair. No, I mean with our modern philosophy of business.
I mean, in a way, people do sign actors to like 3 or 4 picture deals.
Of course.
It's just not.
But that's person to person.
Yeah, it's definitely not that idea of like the big stable of folks it's really interesting. There's a podcast I'm listening to right now called You Must Remember This, which is all about old Hollywood. And it's one of those things where I've often thought of this. Wouldn't it be great to have that stable of actors? But what it actually removes is a lot of choice for actors.
Sure.
So there were times where people would just want to start something new and they'd be like, no, fuck you. You're going to do this.
Yeah.
That is all you're ever going to do. And if you don't want to do that, you'll never work again, which
is
the weird backside, right?
And I suppose, being that it is truly an art form as much as it is a business, it does have to walk that line of being open to any and all comers, you know. But it's a frustration that isn't relevant necessarily to this, except, you know, they had Bronson. I love the story of having 2 piles for Bronson or
Script
Norris.
Piles.
Yep, just toss them no matter what it was. It could be Sense and Sensibility or whatever they said.
Would it be a Bronson Sense and Sensibility, or would it be a Norris Sense and Sensibility?
Exactly.
And that's all the guys cared about.
Yeah.
A couple of things that I thought was fascinating, directly related to movies we've already seen. Number one was the fact that the lead actress of The Last American Virgin called it a movie of 2 tones.
2 tones, and
which is exactly what we felt like.
And I think it had been so long since we had watched Electric Boogaloo.
I didn't remember that at all.
Not at all.
Said that.
No, and it was very accurate.
Yeah. And then the other thing too that I thought was interesting was they talked about Death Wish 2 being the first real Hollywood film Cannon made, which is not something that we necessarily called, but it was interesting to kind of think of that as being like the first, like,
the thing that gave it some gravitas.
Yeah. And they also called Michael Winner the perfect Cannon director. Someone who's kind of mean, kind of rude, it didn't matter, obsessed with boobs and explosions.
It's kind of repulsive to think that that is the perfect Cannon. That's someone that exemplifies this company because of all of the awful stories about him.
Yeah.
And,
horrible stories.
I like to think that there's a silly B-movie sense to it rather than those awful those awful things.
I agree
because
with you.
I think honestly I don't know if we've heard that many stories about the other directors in a negative light as we did.
Winner seemed like a crazy man.
He seems like a piece of work, and yet I feel like they have produced things with the exact same results.
True.
Or at least similar in their genre or in their milieu, It doesn't necessarily... You don't need to be a shitty person to be a Cannon director.
Absolutely. Another thing that I really loved was the fact that they got Jean-Luc Godard to sign a contract on a napkin because that's what they had lying around.
I love that.
That seems so old school Hollywood.
The guy I felt most for was David Engelbach, the writer of Over the Top and Death Wish 2, or I suppose he did Story By. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because it was changed so much.
So much.
And he had multiple times where he felt... He was like, what do I do with my career? This would have been such a better movie because they weren't precious with the writing or the editing, just taking stuff out of movies that he felt would have made a proper film.
They also had mentioned that he took a bunch out of... there was a lot of emotional heft in Invasion USA, which was a Chuck Norris movie, that it just became all about explosions.
Yeah.
Which I think is fascinating. I'm curious if we could ever somehow find those...
The extra cuts. Yeah, that would be interesting.
Which is fascinating that when John Cassavetes did the movie Love Streams with them, he brought a 2-hour and 15-minute cut. And Menachem Golan said, you have to cut 15 minutes. And he came back with a 2.5-hour cut. And he was like, you added time. And he was like, yeah, but it's better now.
Go Cassavetes.
And that's what they released. And I think that's actually really interesting to have. I wonder if that, though, has to do with the fact that Cassavetes
had the name.
Exactly. Because, Menachem Golan directed Over the Top.
Right.
So he's obviously not going to think about it in that way.
Well, and he's clearly not
to add and what to make better.
He's clearly not precious with his own stuff either.
Totally.
That one comment of saying that, are you in love enough with cinema to have the patience?
Yes.
And I don't think they did. I think he loved it, as he said, in an abstract.
Yeah.
But he didn't have the instincts necessarily. Well, and I think we talk about that all the time, about the instincts, especially of children's movies, as you always point out.
Well, what's interesting is I was actually going to relate it to a child. Like, there are definitely people I know who are like, I love children, but they never want a child. Because there is a difference of, like, I love movies.
Yep.
But the time and the care that it takes to make those movies...
And to be an expert in that.
And to be able to work on one thing across 10 drafts and 20 edits is very different than to work on 30 things for just a few hours each.
His schedule sounded...
nuts.
Monstrous.
Yeah, I feel like my schedule is so terrible, but like his is
like
just I can't
running
even
in, editing, going to a meeting,
lunch,
giving notes,
another meeting,
editing a movie. Just wow.
A couple of quotes that I thought were really fascinating was that these are people talking about Golan and Globus, about Cannon films. One was it resembles something, minus good taste.
Yes, I had that written down too.
Another one was, they are American films, and they are so American. So when it's not American, people pick that up.
Yes.
And then the other one was, it was the music supervisor, and he had mentioned this like 3 different times, but it really hit home on when he was talking about Sahara.
Oh, yeah.
About it being an intersection of ideas that don't belong together. Because Sahara started Brooke Shields, and he thought of it as his Lawrence of Arabia mixed with Blue Lagoon, but also The Great Race.
Yep.
And it was fascinating to see
the Frankensteining of things.
And not only that, in the documentary, they put those three scenes together where there was this huge sweeping shot of the desert.
Yep.
Then it was a shot of Brooke Shields standing underwater where you could see her breasts through like a white shirt.
Naturally.
And then it cut directly to a shot of her in like a goofy car with a fake mustache drawn on her face. So that was nuts.
Well, and that was sort of what Menachem did. He would just improvise.
Yeah.
And that's what most of the stuff that he produced kind of seemed like, is that he was just shooting from the hip on most things, you know, and that can be successful to a point, but you got to have some cohesiveness.
Well, there was yes, exactly. Well, and there was two specific stories, both ninja movies, one Into the Ninja and one Return of the Ninja, talking about shooting from the hip. With Into the Ninja, he was shooting it, decided to fire the director and the main star.
Yep.
And they were like, well, I guess the movie's done. And he was like, no, we're in the Philippines, and there's the Philippine Movie Festival.
We'll figure it out.
There's got to be an actor here. And they went over, and Franco Nero was there. And they're like, hey, Franco, you want us to be in a movie? He was like, I guess.
Also, out of everyone
Nero.
at the Philippine Film Festival.
In a movie about a ninja was an Italian dude.
Yep. They ended up dubbing.
Who also did not do any ninja stunts.
Right.
So if you remember, they used the original star as his stunt double.
That's right.
I mean, then Revenge of the Ninja, again, talk about shooting from the hip.
Yep.
They made the movie. It was incomprehensible based off the script. And Menachem was like, we'll reshoot it, and you'll take a baby, and this will happen, and everyone will die, and you'll take this part here, you'll put it there, you'll put this part here, you'll put that part there.
Yeah.
We'll reshoot this, got that there, that put this here, boom, 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 and it's done. And, you know, it works in a weird way.
And again, sometimes it can work.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily a recipe for 100% success.
Yeah.
You know?
One of the quotes I wrote down from Menachem Golan that I think encapsulates him and Yoram Globus. And it's, I think in some ways, the reason I find these guys inspiring in a way was just the fact that he said the name of the game is to do, not just talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something about that where, you know what, you're right. The name of the game is to do. It is to accomplish.
I think
it's not to
think about it eternally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that's why I say inspiring in a way, because I think a lot of people sit around and they talk about the movie they want to make rather than go make the movie.
Right.
And there was a bunch of guys, the Boaz Davidson started a company called New Image that he said that he actually models. Yeah. He models the company after the Canon model.
Sure.
And they're known for the Expendables movies. They're known for the Olympus movies, which is 3 or 4 movies deep now.
I think so,
They did The Hitman's Bodyguard.
Those are such grandchildren of the Canon.
I like the way you said that, grandchildren.
I mean, it has the DNA of it, and it makes so much sense because it's taking that and just polishing it a little bit. And honestly, that's what they needed. Patience. They needed to slow down, and clearly they talked about it. They needed to slow down and really take some care with their movies rather than just being so slapdash with it.
Well, they made, 80 movies in a year?
At one point,
One year, and 50 movies in another.
Sure. Unheard of.
The studio system today, you're lucky if,
you get 3.
Yeah,
5.
well, Disney amongst 5 studios makes 6 or 7 films a year.
Well, because they're trying not
Disney, Pixar, Star Wars,
Marvel,
and they make 5 or 6 movies.
Well, because they're trying not to cannibalize their own business.
Sure.
And that's a difficult thing.
And that's exactly what the Golans did. They would open up movies of their own against other movies.
Same goddamn day.
What was it? Over the Top and Mannequin came out the same weekend.
Granted, it's for 2 different people.
Sure.
2 different groups, but
still.
Yeah. It's admirable. No, it's enviable.
Yeah.
But the way you do it is you research a filmmaking company for maybe 6 years or so, and then you make your movie, right? You make a podcast out of it.
Yes.
And then you research all 300 and something. Then you can make your movie, right?
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Hey, I want to ask you one question before we wrap up.
Well, I wanted to say one more thing, too, but what's your question?
Well, why don't you say your thing first?
Well, all I was going to say is the one thing about watching this documentary again that I'm not looking forward to was how many people in the documentary died between when we first watched it to now.
That's crazy.
And to think of how many people in the documentary have died since it was released in 2014. I mean, there was 7 or 8 people.
Specifically Robert Forster.
And Menachem Golan, Toby Hooper, Zeffirelli, Franco Zeffirelli. I mean, it was, in that sense, it was a little sad.
I guess, piggybacking on that, this is the question. Is the story of Canon, as it's portrayed in the documentary, a comedy or a tragedy?
That's really interesting because, you know, in a comedy, things end happy.
Sure.
Often with a marriage.
Indeed.
Or a birth.
Yes. Thank you, Shakespeare.
Yes, exactly. And in a tragedy, it's about a character who has a flaw.
Right.
That goes from a high status to a low status, right? And then in comedy, it's low status to high status.
Sure.
In a way, they go from low status to high status to low status.
Right.
And I guess it just depends on when you want to stop thinking about them as filmmakers.
Do you look at the body of work and say, well, that exists. Thank you so much for that, ways, rather than looking at the dismal end of the company?
Yeah.
Because the ends are either the company or the ends are the produced movies.
Right.
You know?
Well, and in that sense, I guess there is no way that any movie company, like even Universal, as a company, has had numerous heads over all these years.
Absolutely.
Even though it has been around for 100+ years or whatever it is. There have been numerous heads, and the head of Universal, you know, or the head of whatever, churns over pretty quickly, right? So in that sense, are any of those people failures?
Right.
Or did they actually do the thing they wanted to do? I think the fact that they did a life, like for most producers, an entire lifetime's body of work in a single year, and they did that like 5 years straight.
They've left their mark.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. In some ways, they are very successful. And this is going to sound really weird that I'm taking this. When people talk... Did you remember MoviePass?
Sure.
It was that company that did the $10. You could see as many movies as you want.
I had it for a little bit.
Well, so here's the weird thing. I had MoviePass for like 6 years.
Okay.
When MoviePass first started, they offered like $40 subscriptions. So $40 a month. And you can see as many movies as you want.
Right.
It was a much smaller market, much smaller base.
Yep.
And at $40, some months I wouldn't quite hit $40 worth of movies. Course. And actually it was $45, now that I think about it.
I think so.
And then some months I would hit more than that.
Yeah.
But I think that's why they were able to stay afloat. When they switched to $10, the marketplace just was untenable.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and they had actually said MoviePass was one of the biggest failures they'd ever heard of.
Damn.
And I said, well, their whole point was to revolutionize the way people see movies and disrupt the way people see movies.
And now look at the different
AMC
programs.
AMC has their program that's basically MoviePass.
Yes.
Regal has a program that's basically MoviePass.
Right.
All of the major chains basically have a MoviePass
They've figured
type
it out.
program.
Yeah.
So in some ways, yes, MoviePass itself failed.
Right.
But the idea of it is incredibly successful.
Yeah.
And it is still happening. I mean, like,
and
I have one of those things. I pay $20 a month.
Sure. And to your point, Canon, regardless of a success or failure, comedy or drama, it in some way or another revolutionized the way
that's the point
movies are made.
That was the exact point I was getting at, is movies are now different. The way they are made, the way they're created, it's all different because of Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus.
Indeed.
Which I think is
that's kind of cool.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Which is why we have this podcast and we're talking about it.
Well, there you go. And I think at that point...
Yeah.
I
gotta say...
Join us on this next season's adventure.
Yeah.
What do we... should we give them a rundown of different things that we're going to do, or should we keep that secret?
Well, I know that this year we're definitely going to do Death Wish 3.
Hey!
We are going to talk about Dancers, which is a movie starring Mikhail Baryshnikov.
Oh,
I think this year we're going to look at Robin Williams and Seize the Day. We're going to look at Zeffirelli's Othello.
All right.
I do know that our goal is, just so people following along know, the first half of the season is going to be basically what I am going to dub as available on digital.
Yes, yeah.
Because some of these movies, they are available on digital for a very short time. And in fact, one of the movies that I was most excited about watching this year, John Woo's Fists of the Double K,
got pulled?
Is no longer available anywhere on digital in any way, shape, or form.
Son of a bee.
So, or in DVD or Blu-ray form or anything like that. So some of these movies only exist that way.
Jesus.
And I think we're going to hit a lot of smaller titles early on.
Yes.
But with the...
Just for the availability of it.
But just to make sure that we get to them while they're available.
Agreed.
And then towards the end of the year, towards the middle and the end of the year, we are going to look at some of the bigger films.
Yeah.
We'll have a few sprinkled throughout the season.
We'll update you.
Yeah.
Don't you worry about it.
That'll give you a little bit of an idea of what we are looking forward to immediately.
Excellent.
I will say, for those fans of gore, we are going to be looking at Gore 2.
Hell yeah.
The Outlaw of Gore.
So excited?
Yeah,
for that?
baby.
Why not?
Yeah.
Well, hey Nick, what are we watching next week?
Next week, AJ, we and listeners.
Oh.
Yes, for everyone listening.
For all of us.
For anyone who can hear my voice at this moment in time, or later on the recording.
Oh, sure.
We are going to watch the 1987 classic Dancers, directed by Herbert Ross, starring Mikhail Baryshnikov.
So not probably exotic dancers.
No. Probably not like J-Lo, Hustlers.
Okay.
Something different.
If it's Baryshnikov, I'm guessing jazz.
Yes, exactly. Baryshnikov, known for jazz and flamenco dance. That is it.
Yep.
This is should be an interesting watch. I've never actually seen this movie.
No.
But the director directed a movie called The Turning Point, which also starred Baryshnikov.
Huh.
And The Turning Point was nominated for 11 Academy Awards. It holds the distinction of being the movie with the most Academy Award nominations and a big fat goose egg in wins. But
harsh.
Baryshnikov himself was actually nominated for Best Supporting Actor.
Oh, wow.
So it should be interesting because this movie does have a bit of a pedigree behind it as far as the people who worked on it.
Clearly.
There were several people who worked on Dancers who also worked on The Turning Point. So it should be interesting.
Excellent.
But, you know, it's a very little-known canon film. So we'll see how it has stood the test of time, as they say.
We looking forward to introducing that to you and to us.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool.
And maybe, I was thinking about it, AJ.
What?
What if we watched this movie and became so inspired that we also became podcasters?
Oh, yeah. No, we're already that.
Oh.
But I think we should be dancing podcasters. What do you think?
I think you're fucking ridiculous.
It's true, I am. Next week. Well, fantastic. I'm excited to hear that episode.
I'm excited to also hear that episode.
Heck yeah.
Or record it.
So, how do we follow you?
Okay,
Yeah,
I was gonna say, okay, Porky.
Go ahead.
You could, you screwed me up. Ting tang, walla bing bang, ooh ee!
You sound like somebody from the cantina.
There's this great Bobcat Goldthwait sketch where he's trying to start a sentence and he's like, and then he goes, God damn it, I hit every vowel. Which cracks me up every single time I think about it.
Bobcat.
I do too. Anyways, you could follow me at nicholascpappas.com or on Twitter at nicholascpappas.
At the AJ Hamilton is where I am at, and theajhamilton.com is where you can find me. And you can find us at Creating Canon, that's CANNON, and creatingcanon@gmail.com for any questions, concerns, comments, and complaints. And as we always say at the beginning of every season, happy anniversary.
And
good night.
and good cannon. That was weird.
Yeah. You're weird.
You're weird.
Who do you, who?
Over the top, baby. It's over the top. One of the quotes that I wrote down that Menachem Golan. One of the quotes.
I'm a fucking professional.
I sure get it.
Yeah, buddy.
It up.
Zibidoo.
Ba-ba-bow.
Every beginning of the canon. Nope.
Every cannon of
And-
the year?
Okay.
Shuriken up.
Shuriken up. Okay.
I spent so much time with you today.
Sorry.
Ugh.